an original story narrated exclusively for Love Written in Silence. Clara Lark paused at the threshold of the forbidden West Wing, her fingers trembling against the cold brass doorknob as whispers of scandal followed her like shadows. Across the darkened hall, Duke Edmund Ashcombe stood motionless by the window, his unseeing eyes turned toward a world that had abandoned him 5 years ago when the accident took his sight. The cousin's hushed words echoed in Clara's mind. After the council dinner, the trusteeship will be ready. A plot to strip the Duke of his title and dignity. Between them stretched an impossible distance. He, nobility trapped in darkness. She, a maid with a tarnished past seeking invisibility. When Clara crossed the ballroom floor and took the blind Duke's hand before the shocked aristocracy, she knew neither of them would ever be invisible again. The grand ballroom of Harrowden Hall glittered under the light of a dozen chandeliers, a sea of silk and jewels swirling to the orchestra's elegant waltz. Yet in the center of this splendor stood a solitary figure, Edmund Ashcombe, the Duke of Harrowden Tall, and imposing in his formal attire, his clouded eyes betraying the blindness that had claimed him 5 years prior. The music continued, but around him, a circle of emptiness had formed. Ladies whispered behind fans. Gentlemen cleared their throats and looked away. No one approached the Duke for a dance. No one dared bridge the gap between pity and propriety. From her position against the wall, Clara Lark observed it all. As a maid, she was meant to be invisible, merely ensuring that champagne glasses remained full and fallen handkerchiefs were retrieved. But something in the Duke's rigid posture, the subtle tremor in his gloved hand, the proud tilt of his chin, despite the humiliation, stirred something forgotten within her. "Look at him," whispered Lady Harrington to her companion. Edmund was once the most sought-after bachelor in the county. Now he stands like a monument to his own tragedy. "His cousin Richard will have the trusteeship by month's end," replied Lord Pembroke. "A blind duke cannot possibly manage an estate of Harrowden's magnitude." Clara felt her heart quicken. She had heard those same words in the corridors, had sensed the slow, deliberate campaign to diminish the Duke in the eyes of society. Without conscious thought, she set down her serving tray. The orchestra began a new waltz, slower and more melancholy than the last. The Duke's shoulders tensed, his isolation now painfully apparent as couples formed around him, careful to leave him standing alone. Clara moved forward. Her plain dark dress parted the sea of silks and satins. Whispers rippled across the ballroom as she approached him directly, stopping before him with a quiet certainty that belied her station. "Your Grace," she said softly, loud enough for only him to hear, "would you honor me with this dance?" For a moment, he seemed frozen in disbelief. Then, with remarkable precision, he extended his hand. Clara placed hers within it. Gasps echoed through the hall. A servant dancing with a duke. It was unthinkable, improper, scandalous. But as Edmund placed his other hand carefully at her waist, and they began to move in perfect time to the music, something shifted in the air of Harrowden Hall. In that moment of defiance against convention, everything changed. For both of them, there would be no going back. 3 weeks earlier, Clara Lark had arrived at Harrowden Hall with nothing but a small trunk and a letter of recommendation that had cost her last savings to obtain. The imposing stone manor rose from the morning mist like a fortress, its west wing, the Duke's private quarters, shuttered and silent. "You'll work primarily in the east wing, Mrs. Winters," the housekeeper explained as she led Clara through corridors lined with ancestral portraits. "The West Wing is forbidden to most staff. The Duke values his privacy above all else." Clara nodded, keeping her eyes downcast. "I understand, Mrs. Winters. I hope you do. Your references speak well of your discretion, which is why I've taken you on despite." The older woman paused, her meaning clear. Despite the rumors. Despite whatever had forced Clara to leave her previous position so abruptly. "I'm grateful for the opportunity," Clara replied softly. "See that you remain so. Harrowden Hall is not a place for gossip or curiosity. The Duke has suffered enough, without servants gawking at his condition." As they passed a heavy oak door, Clara glimpsed a long corridor leading to the West Wing. A single footman emerged, carrying a tray with an untouched breakfast. "Does he never leave his quarters?" Clara asked before she could stop herself. Mrs. Winters' lips thinned. "The Duke conducts his affairs as he sees fit, or rather, as he doesn't see." Her attempt at humor fell flat. "Mr. Richard Ashcombe, his cousin, handles most estate matters now." "It's Simpler that way. That evening, as Clara polished silver in the servants' hall, she overheard two footmen talking. "Richard's bringing the council members next month. Says it's time to formalize things. The trusteeship, you mean? What else? Can't have a blind man running one of the largest estates in the county. It's been 5 years of this charade." Clara's hand stilled on the silver spoon. She thought of the forbidden wing, of the Duke hidden away, while his cousin managed his affairs. Something in her chest tightened, a familiar sense of injustice that she had promised herself to ignore in this new life. But some promises, she was beginning to realize, were impossible to keep. Edmund Ashcombe, Duke of Harrowden, stood by the window of his study, fingers tracing the familiar ridge of the wooden sill. Though his eyes could no longer see the gardens below, he remembered every hedge and fountain, every rose that would now be blooming in the June warmth. 5 years had passed since the hunting accident. 5 years since a fallen branch had struck his head, leaving his world in permanent darkness. The physicians had called it a miracle he survived at all. Some days, Edmund wondered if survival had been a mercy or merely a prolonged sentence. "Your correspondence, Your Grace," announced Jenkins, his valet of 20 years, placing several letters on the desk. "And Mr. Richard asks if you'll join the family for dinner tonight." "To what end?" Edmund asked, his voice carrying the edge it always did when his cousin was mentioned. "So they can watch me fumble with cutlery and speak to me as though blindness has rendered me deaf as well. The Dowager Duchess, your mother, has expressed concern about your continued isolation." Edmund's laugh was hollow. "My mother expressed more concern over the damaged tapestries after my accident than she did over my eyes. No, Jenkins, I'll dine here, as usual." After the valet departed, Edmund made his way carefully to his desk. His prison might be gilded, but it was a prison nonetheless. In the beginning, he had tried to maintain his duties, to prove his competence despite his blindness. But each attempt had been met with gentle resistance from his family. "You must rest, Edmund. Richard can handle this matter. We wouldn't want to overtax you." Gradually, the estate had slipped from his grasp. Documents requiring his signature became fewer. Decisions were made without his consultation. His once busy days of managing Harrowden's vast holdings became empty hours filled with nothing but darkness and the ticking of the clock. The worst was their pity. He could hear it in their voices, feel it in the way conversations stopped when he entered a room. He had once been respected, even feared for his sharp business acumen and uncompromising standards. Now he was merely tolerated, a living reminder of tragedy. Edmund's fingers found the edge of a letter, feeling for the seal. He recognized it as Parliament's stamp, likely another invitation he would decline. What use was sitting in the House of Lords when he could neither read the bills nor see the faces of those arguing them? A quiet knock interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," he called, straightening his posture by habit. The door opened, but the footsteps that followed were unfamiliar, lighter than Jenkins, more hesitant. "Who's there?" he demanded, tension tightening his shoulders. A woman's voice answered, soft but steady. "Clara Lark, Your Grace. I've been sent to clean the fireplace." Clara had not intended to enter the forbidden wing. But when Mrs. Winters fell ill with a fever, the regular staff was stretched thin, and Clara was instructed to tend to the Duke's fireplace. Touch nothing else, speak only if spoken to, and leave as quickly as possible. She worked quietly, aware of the Duke seated at his desk across the room. His stillness was unnerving, as though he had trained himself to exist without movement, without sound. Only the occasional turn of his head, when a floorboard creaked beneath her feet, betrayed his acute awareness of her presence. As she finished her task, voices drifted from the adjoining room, the Duke's private study, where the door stood slightly ajar. The council dinner must proceed as planned, came a cultured male voice that Clara would later learn belonged to Richard Ashcombe. "We'll seat Edmund at the head, of course, but I'll direct the conversation. And if he manages well," asked another voice, older and more cautious. Richard's laugh was soft and dismissive. "He won't. I've arranged for the estate ledgers to be presented without prior warning. Complex questions about tenant disputes on the north boundary. The new irrigation proposal. He hasn't been briefed on any of it. The legal papers for the trusteeship are prepared, then, ready for the council's approval. After the dinner, it's a mere formality. Edmund's blindness makes him incapable of managing Harrowden. The council will see that clearly enough." Clara froze, her hand tightening around the poker. The Duke had not moved, but she could see the tension in his jaw, the whitening of his knuckles, as his fingers pressed against the desk. He had heard everything. When the voices faded, Clara gathered her cleaning tools, desperate to escape before the Duke acknowledged what they both knew. But as she reached the door, his voice stopped her. "Miss Lark," she turned slowly. "Yes, Your Grace. How long have you been employed?" "At Harrowden Hall." 3 weeks, Your Grace." He nodded slowly, his unseeing eyes directed just past her shoulder. "And in those 3 weeks, have you found the household to your liking?" Clara hesitated, uncertain of his meaning. "The staff has been accommodating, but not welcoming. Just as they are not welcoming to me in my own home." His bitter smile held no warmth. "You may go, Miss Lark, and I would appreciate your discretion regarding what you've overheard." "Of course, Your Grace." She curtsied, though he couldn't see it. As she closed the door behind her, Clara's mind raced. A conspiracy unfolding in plain sight, with the Duke's dignity and authority as its casualty, and somehow, unwittingly, she had become a witness to it all. The following evening, Clara found herself summoned to the Duke's chambers. Jenkins led her into the study, where Edmund sat before the fire, his expression inscrutable. "Miss Lark is here, Your Grace," Jenkins announced before withdrawing, closing the door with a soft click. "You overheard my cousin yesterday," Edmund stated without preamble. Clara clasped her hands tightly. "I did, Your Grace." "And what do you make of his plans?" The question surprised her. Servants weren't asked for opinions, especially not by dukes. "It's not my place to—" "I didn't ask about your place," he interrupted sharply. "I asked what you think." Clara took a breath. "I think it's wrong to judge a man's capabilities based solely on one limitation, however significant." Silence stretched between them. Then, unexpectedly, Edmund laughed, a short, harsh sound. "How diplomatic. What you mean is that my cousin is orchestrating my removal from power, while the household watches and does nothing." "Yes," Clara admitted quietly. "That is what I meant." Edmund stood and moved to the window with practiced ease, his hand trailing along the furniture to guide his path. "Why did you come to Harrowden Hall, Miss Lark?" The question caught her off guard. "I needed employment. There are many houses seeking staff." "Why this one?" Clara hesitated. "I needed somewhere remote, somewhere my past wouldn't follow me." His voice softened slightly. "You sought anonymity, just as I have embraced isolation. We both hide, it seems." He turned toward her, his clouded eyes somehow finding her with unnerving accuracy. "I have a proposition, Miss Lark. I need to prepare for this council dinner, to demonstrate my competence despite my blindness. I need someone who can be my eyes without becoming my keeper." Clara's heart quickened. "And what would I receive in return?" "Protection, a position no one can question. And my word that whatever sent you seeking anonymity will remain buried." It was madness. A maid allying herself with a duke against his own family could only end in disaster. Yet Clara found herself considering it, not out of self-interest, but because of the dignity in his voice, the determination to fight rather than surrender. "When do we begin?" she asked. The library became their sanctuary, a place where rank temporarily dissolved in service of their shared purpose. Each night after her duties ended, Clara would slip through the shadowed corridors to meet the Duke, who waited with rigid patience for their lessons to begin. 7 paces from the door to the first bookshelf, Clara instructed, watching as Edmund counted his steps. 3 more to the reading table. "The chair is positioned at your 2 o'clock. He moved with careful precision, his hand finding the chair back exactly where she had described. "And for the council dinner," described the layout again. "Long table, seating for 16. You'll be at the head, with Richard to your right. The estate manager, Mr. Holloway, will sit third from your left. He tends to speak softly, so you'll need to lean slightly to hear him." Edmund nodded, committing each detail to memory. The ledgers. Clara retrieved the heavy account books she had borrowed from the steward's office. "I've marked the relevant pages with thread. When you run your finger along the binding, you'll feel the difference." They worked methodically, night after night. Clara reading aloud the estate reports, Edmund memorizing figures and facts about his own lands that had been kept from him for years. His mind was sharp, absorbing information with remarkable speed. It was his confidence that needed rebuilding. "They'll be watching for any hesitation," Edmund said one evening, frustration evident in his voice, after he had confused 2 tenant names. "Any sign of uncertainty will be noted and used against me." "Then we must give them none," Clara replied, her voice steady. Again from the beginning. As the weeks passed, their relationship shifted subtly. Clara, no longer felt the need to address him as Your Grace when they were alone. Edmund stopped tensing when her hand occasionally guided his to the correct page or position. One night, as they practiced navigating the dining room, Edmund stumbled on an unexpected footstool. Clara caught his arm instinctively, her hand firm against the fine wool of his coat. For a moment, they stood frozen in the contact. "I apologize," she said, withdrawing her hand quickly. "Don't," Edmund replied, his voice unexpectedly gentle. "Your touch. It's the first in 5 years that hasn't been either clinical or pitying." In the candlelight, Clara studied his face, the proud profile, the tension that never fully left his features, the eyes that saw nothing yet seemed to perceive everything. She realized with a start that she no longer saw his blindness when she looked at him. She simply saw Edmund. "Shall we continue?" she asked softly. He nodded, composure regained. From the beginning, Clara began to notice the subtle sabotage 3 weeks into their alliance. A chair moved 6 inches from its usual position, causing Edmund to brush against it during their practice walk through the drawing room. Important correspondence misplaced by Richard's secretary. Dinner invitations that arrived after the events had occurred. "The house itself conspires against you," she told Edmund one evening in the library. "Small changes, easily dismissed as oversight, yet perfectly designed to make you appear disoriented and incapable." Edmund's expression darkened. "Describe them." Clara detailed her observations. The rearranged furniture, the delayed messages, the servants who took their cues from Richard, rather than their rightful master. Edmund listened in silence, his fingers drumming a slow rhythm against the armrest. "And the staff," he finally asked. "Where do their loyalties lie?" "Divided," Clara answered honestly. "Mrs. Winters follows tradition. She serves the title, not the man. The younger servants follow Richard because he's present, visible. Jenkins remains loyal to you, but he's one man. And you, Clara, where do your loyalties lie?" The question hung between them. Clara considered her answer carefully. "With the truth," she finally said. "And the truth is that you are being systematically undermined in your own home." That night, as Clara returned to the servants' quarters, she encountered Barton, the butler, examining the mail tray in the front hall. His eyes narrowed when he saw her emerging from the Duke's wing. "Mrs. Winters mentioned, you've been attending to the Duke in the evenings," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "Yes, Mr. Barton. His Grace requested assistance with organizing his personal library." Barton nodded slowly, curious that he should choose you, a new addition to the staff, rather than someone more established. Perhaps he preferred someone without preconceptions about his condition, Clara suggested, meeting the butler's gaze steadily. Something shifted in Barton's expression, not quite approval, but a flicker of consideration. The next morning, Clara noticed that the mail tray contained a letter addressed directly to the Duke, the seal unbroken. It was the first piece of correspondence that had reached him without passing through Richard's hands in months. The house that betrayed was beginning, slowly, to remember its true master. "You're certain about the council dinner?" Clara asked, standing by the window of Edmund's study. Outside, autumn had painted the gardens in shades of amber and gold. "Richard has stacked every advantage against you." Edmund sat at his desk, fingers tracing the raised embossing of the Harrowden crest on a sheet of paper. "I have no choice. To refuse would be to concede defeat before the battle begins." "Then we must be prepared for anything," Clara said. "I've spoken with Jenkins. He'll ensure your formal attire is impeccable. I've memorized the seating arrangement and will be serving, so I can remain close without drawing attention." Edmund's hand stilled on the paper. "You've taken considerable risk, Clara. If Richard discovers your involvement, he won't," she said with more confidence than she felt. "You haven't told me," Edmund said after a moment. "What drove you to Harrowden Hall? What past you're hiding from?" Clara turned from the window, studying his face in profile. In these weeks of close proximity, she had come to read his expressions with precision. The slight furrow between his brows that signaled concentration, the tightening at the corners of his mouth when he was frustrated. "Does it matter?" she asked softly. "It matters if it places you in jeopardy. My cousin is not a man who forgives interference." Clara sighed. "There was a misunderstanding at my previous position." The son of the house expressed interest. "When I refused his advances, he claimed I had encouraged him. His mother believed him. No one believed me." Edmund was silent for a long moment. "So you came here, where no one knew your name or your story?" Yes, and now you risk that anonymity for me. His voice had softened, losing its usual edge of command. Why? The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither was prepared to voice. Clara thought of their evenings in the library, of the gradual awakening she had witnessed in him, pride returning, purpose replacing resignation. Because she said simply, "You trusted me first." Edmund rose from his desk and moved toward her with the sure steps of a man who had memorized his surroundings. When he stood before her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence, he reached out with careful precision and found her hand. "Then we shall trust each other," he said, "and face what comes." The annual Harrowden Autumn Ball had once been the social highlight of the county. This year, it would serve as Richard's stage setting for the council dinner, to follow a public reminder of the Duke's limitations before the private assessment of his competence. Clara watched from her position along the wall as Edmund entered the ballroom on Jenkins' arm. He wore formal evening attire, his posture regal, his expression composed. Only she could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he counted steps in his mind. Richard approached immediately, his smile benevolent for the watching crowd. "Edmund, how wonderful to see you joining the festivities." He gestured to the assembled guests, though Edmund could not see the movement. "Everyone is delighted by your presence." "I'm sure they are," Edmund replied dryly, "though I find it curious that I wasn't informed of this ball until yesterday." Richard's smile never faltered. "A simple oversight, I assure you. Now let me introduce you to Lady Pembroke. She's most eager to renew your acquaintance." For the next hour, Edmund was guided through a carefully orchestrated series of interactions. Clara observed how Richard presented him to guests with subtle emphasis on his condition. "Edmund manages remarkably well, all things considered, and we must speak loudly, so the Duke can follow our conversation," each comment reinforcing the image of Edmund as diminished, dependent. The orchestra began a waltz. Couples moved onto the floor, ladies in silk and gentlemen in formal black. Edmund remained at the edge, conversation around him dwindling as dancers were claimed and groups reformed. Clara saw the moment Richard's plan became clear. Edmund stood alone in the center of the ballroom, abandoned as the music played on. No lady approached him. No one extended a hand. The message was unmistakable. A blind duke was no fit partner, in dance or in leadership. The humiliation was deliberate and exquisite in its cruelty. Edmund's face betrayed nothing, but Clara saw his hand tighten on his cane, the slight lift of his chin, as he faced the silent judgment of society. Without conscious thought, Clara set down her serving tray. She moved through the crowd, ignoring the startled glances and whispered comments. Her plain black dress, the uniform of service, parted the sea of finery until she stood before Edmund. "Your Grace," she said, loud enough to be heard over the music, "would you honor me with this dance?" For a moment, Edmund seemed frozen in disbelief. Then, with remarkable precision, he extended his hand. "The honor would be mine, Miss Lark." As they moved into the waltz, Clara whispered, "3 steps forward, then turn to your right." Edmund followed her guidance flawlessly, his hand steady at her waist. Around them, the ballroom had fallen into shocked silence. The scandal of a duke dancing, with a servant eclipsing, even the spectacle of his blindness. In that moment of defiance, everything changed. By morning, the scandal had consumed Harrowden Hall. Clara was summoned to Mrs. Winter's sitting room, where the housekeeper's face was pinched with disapproval. "Explain yourself," Mrs. Winters demanded. "A servant dancing with the Duke of Harrowden, in full view of the county's finest families. Have you lost your senses entirely?" Clara stood with her hands clasped before her, outwardly composed despite her racing heart. His Grace was standing alone. I believed it would reflect poorly on the household if no one attended to him. Attended to him, Mrs. Winters' voice rose. By creating a spectacle that will be gossiped about in every drawing room from here to London. Mr. Richard is furious. Lady Ashcombe is mortified. The guests were shocked beyond words. "I apologize for any embarrassment caused to the family," Clara said, the words hollow in her mouth. Mrs. Winters studied her with narrowed eyes. "There's talk below stairs. About your evenings in the Duke's library. About your familiarity with His Grace." Heat rose in Clara's cheeks. "I've been assisting with organizing his correspondence. Nothing improper has occurred." "See that it remains so," Mrs. Winters said coldly. "You're confined to the servants' quarters when not performing your duties. No more visits to the West Wing without my explicit permission." Mr. Richard has suggested your dismissal, but I've convinced him to wait until after the council dinner next week. We can't afford more disruption before such an important event. Dismissed, Clara made her way to the kitchens, aware of the stares and whispers that followed her. The other maids drew away as she approached, their conversation dying abruptly. Only Mary, the youngest kitchen maid, dared speak to her. "Is it true?" she whispered as they peeled potatoes side by side. "Did you really dance with the Duke?" "Yes," Clara admitted. Mary's eyes widened. "Was it very grand?" "To dance in the ballroom with all those fine people watching." Clara thought of Edmund's hand in hers, the careful way they had moved together, the defiance in that simple act. "It wasn't about grandeur," she said softly. "It was about dignity." Later that afternoon, Clara encountered Barton in the service corridor. The butler regarded her with an unreadable expression. "Miss Lark," he said formally. "A word, if you please." She followed him into his small office, expecting further reprimand. Instead, he closed the door and spoke in a low voice. "The council dinner has been moved forward. It will take place tomorrow evening, not next week as planned. Mr. Richard made the change this morning. He cleared his throat. After last night's events, Clara felt cold dread settle in her stomach. The Duke doesn't know. No, the notification was misplaced on its way to his chambers. Barton's emphasis made his meaning clear. "I thought you should be aware. Why are you telling me this?" Clara asked, studying the butler's face. Barton straightened his already impeccable posture. "I have served Harrowden Hall for 32 years, Miss Lark. I serve the dukedom, not any individual who may temporarily manage its affairs." It was as close to a declaration of loyalty as she could expect. "Thank you, Mr. Barton." As she turned to leave, he added quietly, "The Duke will need to be prepared. Tonight." Clara nodded, understanding the risk Barton was taking. "He will be." Dusk fell over Harrowden Hall, shadows lengthening across the gardens as Clara made her way to the West Wing. She had evaded Mrs. Winter's watchful eye by volunteering to deliver fresh linens to the upper floors. Then, slipping through the servants' passage that connected the wings, she found Edmund in his study, dictating a letter to Jenkins. When the valet announced her presence, Edmund dismissed him with a nod. "Clara," he said once they were alone, "I was told you were forbidden from the West Wing." "There are more important matters than Mrs. Winter's rules," she replied, moving closer. "The council dinner has been moved to tomorrow evening. Richard changed it after the ball, deliberately keeping you uninformed." Edmund's expression hardened. "So soon?" "He's not wasting any time. He fears what happened last night, that people might see you differently if given the chance." Clara hesitated. "The dance created quite a stir, so I've heard." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Jenkins described the faces of the assembly in rather colorful detail. Lady Harrington apparently looked as though she'd swallowed her pearls. "Despite everything," Clara laughed. "That's an accurate assessment." Edmund moved to the fireplace, his steps sure in the familiar space. "You've risked much, Clara. Your position, your reputation. They were never particularly secured to begin with," she replied. "But we have little time. The dinner is at 7 tomorrow. Richard has invited the estate steward, 3 tenant farmers from the North Properties, the family solicitor, and Lord Pembroke as an impartial observer." Edmund nodded. "All carefully chosen, no doubt. The steward answers to Richard. The solicitor prepared the trusteeship papers, and Pembroke has coveted our eastern pastures for years." They spent the next hours in intense preparation, reviewing the estate matters most likely to arise, rehearsing Edmund's responses to potential challenges. Clara read aloud from the account books, Edmund committing figures to memory with remarkable precision. "The irrigation proposal will be their trap," he said, pacing before the fire. "Richard has kept it from me, deliberately. I'll need details, costs affected acreage, tenant concerns." Clara consulted her notes. £5,000 initial investment. 300 acres affected. The Millers and Fosters oppose it because it diverts water from their grazing land. As midnight approached, Edmund paused their work. "You should return to the servants' quarters before you're missed. There's still more to cover," Clara protested, "and we've covered enough." He moved toward her with the confidence of a man in his own domain. When he stood before her, he reached out, his hand finding her shoulder with unerring accuracy. "Whatever happens tomorrow, Clara, know that you have given me something I thought lost forever." "What's that?" she asked softly. "Purpose." His hand moved to her cheek, the touch light as a whisper. and the courage to fight for what is mine. Clara closed her eyes, allowing herself this one moment of connection before the battle ahead. Then we shall fight together, she promised. They will not find you wanting. The council chamber of Harrowden Hall had witnessed 3 centuries of ducal decisions. Oak-paneled walls bore the weight of history. Leaded windows cast diamond patterns of late afternoon light. Across the massive table, where Edmund now sat at the head, straight-backed and composed, Clara stood with the other servants along the wall, positioned where Edmund would know she was present. She wore the formal black dress and white cap of household staff, invisible to the gentlemen seated around the table, yet acutely aware of every nuance of the unfolding drama. Richard Ashcombe had arranged himself at Edmund's right hand, the picture of familial support. Gentlemen, he began smoothly, thank you for adjusting your schedules for this important meeting. As you know, we gather to discuss the management of Harrowden's affairs, and to ensure the estate's continued prosperity. Lord Pembroke nodded gravely, a duty we take most seriously, especially in light of challenging circumstances. His gaze flickered to Edmund's unseeing eyes. Indeed, Richard agreed. Perhaps we should begin with the quarterly accounts. Mr. Holloway, if you would present the figures. The steward cleared his throat nervously. Certainly, sir. The third quarter shows revenue of £17,800, expenditures total £15,300, leaving a surplus of £2,500, Edmund completed calmly. Down from last year's third quarter by approximately £800, primarily due to reduced timber sales from the North Woods. Silence fell across the table. The steward blinked in surprise. That's correct, Your Grace. Edmund inclined his head slightly. And the reduced timber sales were my decision, as the North Woods required time to regenerate after last year's aggressive harvesting. I believe I made that clear in my directive last winter. Richard's smile tightened. A directive that unfortunately never reached Mr. Holloway. How curious, Edmund replied. Just as the notification of this dinner's changed date never reached me. The tension in the room thickened. Clara watched Richard's fingers tap an agitated rhythm against the polished table. Perhaps we should discuss the irrigation proposal, Richard suggested, changing tactics. A significant investment, but one that promises substantial returns for the South Fields, at the expense of the Miller and Foster grazing lands, Edmund noted. Their families have been Harrowden tenants for 4 generations. The diverted water would reduce their hay yields by an estimated 20%. The solicitor exchanged a glance with Richard. Your Grace seems remarkably well-informed for someone who has been indisposed. Edmund's smile was cold. Blindness affects my eyes, Mr. Simmons, not my mind. Nor, it seems, my ability to uncover information deliberately kept from me. As the meeting continued, Clara watched the gradual shift in the room. The growing uncertainty in Richard's posture, the thoughtful consideration replacing dismissive pity in Lord Pembroke's expression. Edmund answered each question with precision and authority, his command of estate matters unimpeachable. The trap Richard had laid was slowly, inexorably, closing around its creator. Instead, 2 hours into the council meeting, Richard made his final attempt. He placed a stack of documents before Edmund with a theatrical sigh. These require your immediate review and signature, cousin. Property transfers for the eastern tenancies, authorization for the irrigation project, and several other pressing matters. Edmund's fingers touched the edge of the papers. Documents I've never been permitted to review, presented without warning, requiring immediate signature. How convenient. The estate cannot wait indefinitely while you adjust to your limitations, Richard replied, his voice carrying just enough sympathy to disguise the steel beneath. My limitations. Edmund repeated the words softly. He turned toward the assembled council members. Gentlemen, for 5 years, I have been gradually removed from the management of my own lands. Correspondence diverted. Meetings conducted without my knowledge. Decisions made in my name, but not by my will. He stood, his height commanding even in his blindness. I have been patient. I have endured the well-meaning pity, the careful exclusion, the whispers that I am no longer fit to hold my title. That patience ends today. A tense silence filled the chamber. Edmund moved away from his chair, and Clara saw his moment of hesitation, a slight uncertainty about his position in the unfamiliar room. Without thinking, she stepped forward from her place against the wall. Your Grace, she said quietly, the fire needs tending. It was their signal, established during their preparations. Edmund turned toward her voice, finding his bearings. With deliberate steps, he moved to the center of the room, commanding the space. I will not sign these documents today. I will review them with assistance I trust and render my decision in due course. This council will reconvene in 1 month, at which time I will present my own assessment of Harrowden's management and future direction. Lord Pembroke cleared his throat. Your Grace, if I may, your cousin has only acted with the estate's interests at heart. Has he? Edmund's voice was even. Then he will welcome my renewed involvement, rather than resist it. Clara watched Richard's face, saw the calculation behind his eyes. To object now would reveal too much, expose the manipulation too clearly. Of course, Richard finally said, I have only ever wished to spare you unnecessary burdens. How thoughtful, Edmund replied, the irony in his tone unmistakable. But I find I prefer my burdens unspared, my duties uncushioned, and my authority unquestioned. As the meeting adjourned, Clara saw the council members' expressions, not pity now, but something closer to respect. The Duke of Harrowden had returned, and darkness had not diminished him. A week after the council meeting, Clara was summoned to the Dowager Duchess's private sitting room. She entered with trepidation, curtsying deeply before Edmund's mother. The Dowager Duchess was a handsome woman of 60, her silver hair arranged in an elegant coiffure, her posture rigid with aristocratic bearing. She regarded Clara with cool assessment. Miss Lark, she said, I find myself in the unusual position of addressing a servant about matters typically beyond their concern. Clara remained silent, hands clasped before her. My son has informed me of your assistance during recent events. He credits you with helping him regain control of his affairs. The Dowager's tone suggested this was not entirely welcome news. He has also requested that you be reassigned from general household duties to a position as his personal secretary. Clara's surprise must have shown on her face, for the Dowager's expression hardened. I advised against it, naturally. The arrangement would be most irregular. A young woman of your station, working closely with the Duke. After that display at the ball, she shook her head. Society has already begun to talk. I understand your concerns, Your Grace, Clara replied carefully. Do you? The Dowager leaned forward slightly. Do you understand that whatever happens between you and my son affects not just him, but centuries of Ashcombe reputation? Do you understand that your presence in his life has already caused considerable gossip? I meant no harm to the family name. Intentions matter little in the face of consequences, Miss Lark. The Dowager sighed. However, Edmund has been most insistent. He claims your assistance is invaluable, that you see him as a man, rather than an invalid. A mother cannot dismiss her son's happiness, even when it comes from unexpected quarters. Clara felt her heart quicken. What are you saying, Your Grace? I am saying that Edmund has made his choice, and I will not oppose it. You may accept the position as his secretary. The Dowager's gaze was piercing. But understand this. Society may never fully accept such an arrangement. There will always be whispers, judgments. Edmund's position protects him from the worst of it. You will not be so fortunate. Later that evening, Clara found Edmund in the library, his fingers tracing the spines of books he could no longer read, but refused to part with. Your mother spoke with me, she said softly. Edmund turned toward her voice. And did she deliver my offer? She did, along with a clear assessment of the consequences. He moved toward her, navigating the space with the confidence he had regained in recent weeks. And what is your answer? Clara considered the path before her, the judgment of society, the whispers that would follow her, the precarious position between servant and confidant. She thought of the life she had fled, the anonymity she had sought at Harrowden Hall. And she thought of Edmund standing alone in the ballroom, of their quiet evenings in the library, of the trust they had built between them. I accept, she said simply. Edmund's smile held a warmth few ever witnessed. Good, because Harrowden needs rebuilding, and I find I cannot do it without my eyes. You mean without your secretary, Clara corrected gently. I mean, Edmund replied, without you, Clara Lark. Twilight settled over Harrowden Hall, casting long shadows through the ballroom windows. The grand space stood empty, the chandeliers unlit save for a single candelabra that Clara had placed on the pianoforte. 3 months had passed since the council meeting. Richard had retreated to London, his ambitions thwarted but his dignity publicly preserved through a carefully worded announcement about family responsibilities requiring his attention elsewhere. The household had adjusted to the Duke's renewed authority, and if some staff members still regarded Clara with suspicion, others had come to respect the quiet competence with which she fulfilled her new role. Society's response had been predictably mixed. Some doors had closed. Invitations that once included the Duke of Harrowden now mysteriously failed to arrive. Other, more pragmatic members of the aristocracy maintained connections, recognizing that a duke's influence remained valuable regardless of personal circumstances. Clara entered the ballroom silently, carrying a second candelabra. She had received Edmund's request to meet him here with curiosity, their work typically confined to the library or study. She set the candles down, the soft light creating a small island of warmth in the vast room. "I thought I heard you," Edmund said, emerging from the shadows near the doorway. He wore evening attire, as formal as the night of the autumn ball, though no guests would witness it. "You requested my presence, Your Grace," Clara replied, the formality a habit she maintained when they might be overheard. Edmund smiled slightly. "I believe we are quite alone, Clara." He moved toward her, with the sure steps of a man who had reclaimed his domain, stopping when they stood face to face in the center of the ballroom. "Do you know what today is?" he asked. Clara considered. "Thursday, the 15th of December. It is the anniversary of my accident," Edmund said quietly. 5 years and 3 months since I lost my sight. For 5 years, I marked this day by retreating further into darkness. This year, I choose differently. He extended his hand, palm up, in the formal invitation to dance. "Miss Clara Lark, would you do me the honor?" Clara hesitated. "There's no music. I hear it nonetheless." His expression softened. "Humor a blind man's fancy, Clara." She placed her hand in his, and his other hand found her waist with gentle precision. They began to move in a slow waltz, their steps echoing in the empty ballroom. "When you crossed this floor 3 months ago," Edmund said as they turned, "you changed everything. Not because you pitied me, but because you saw me when others looked away." "I still see you," Clara replied softly. They danced in silence for several moments, the candlelight casting their joined shadows against the wall. Finally, Edmund spoke again. "The world will never fully accept what exists between us. There will always be those who disapprove, who whisper, who judge." "I know," Clara said. Edmund's hand tightened slightly on hers. "Does that frighten you?" Clara thought of all she had endured, of the past she had fled, of the strength she had found in this unlikely alliance. "No," she answered truthfully. "Not anymore." As they continued their private dance, Edmund smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed his austere features. "Then we shall face it together, Clara Lark," he said, her name on his lips a declaration. "Not in darkness, and not in fear, but in the light of our own making."